All right, good morning, everybody, to Wednesday. So we're going to continue our discussion of this stuff. So, yeah, black and white fallacy. I don't think we've actually talked about black and white fallacies before. So let me just mention what that is. Looking over the comments on in the Help Center. Black and white fallacy is when you reduce you improperly reduce a complicated issue to just like X versus Y. One of the most common ones, which I do, I try not to, but I do, is, thinking about politics in America as being Republican versus Democrat, right? It's a very easy way of talking about it, right wing versus left wing, right? And the reality of the situation is much more complicated, right? There's a lot of topics, and there's a lot of views on a lot of these topics, and so the actual reality of politics is much more complicated, right? Like there are Democrats that are opposed to abortion. There's Republicans that are for abortion. There are Democrats that are against gun control, and there are Republicans that are for gun control. It's and then there's as many independent voters as there are Democrats and Republicans, and they just get completely ignored in America because we always talk about it in terms of Republican versus Democrat. But there's actually a huge number of independent voters in America, and they basically get ignored. During election season, it's always like, all right, which way are they going to vote, Republican or Democrat? It's like, okay, they're independent, but like really secretly they're just Republicans and Democrats that just don't label themselves that way, and I think that's a bit unfair. And one of the outcomes of that black and white fallacy is that there's really very little acknowledgement, again, outside of like presidential elections where like the independent vote actually really makes or breaks every candidate. You've got CNN and MSNBC, supporting the Democrat view. You got Fox supporting the Republican view. There's no television station that is like supporting the independent view, and independent voters are like, I don't want to just say a number off the top of my head. How many independents are there in America? Yeah, so Republicans 27%, Democrats 30%, independents 40%. Right? Like that's pretty significant. And they're almost invisibly erased because of the black and white fallacy of thinking everybody in America is either Republican or Democrat, or or maybe they're just not politically engaged, but there's more independents. If they were their own political party, they would be the most powerful political party in America. And as it is, the narrative doesn't, really support the notion of an independent voter. So, pizza time. Yeah. People that lean Republican, people that lean Democrat. Okay. So. Independents are 27% of Florida's voters. Democrats are 37%. Republicans 35%. Yeah. So okay, it is a little more complicated than self-identification, but yeah. Do you guys understand black and white fallacy? It's like when you reduce a complicated problem to just X versus Y, right? And it has the term black and white fallacy has actually nothing to do with racism. It turns out in this case that there's a black and white fallacy thinking about racism in terms of black versus white, but that's actually just a coincidence. The black and white fallacies are everywhere. Very common, very common fallacy. George W. Bush in the Gulf War II, he said, "If you're not for us, you're against us," right? Which it's not true. There's quite a lot of possible responses to invading another country. Like maybe You know, you support the troops, but you think the war is a dumb idea, right? Like, that's a perfectly allowable position, according to me at least. But as George W. Bush is like, if you're not for us, you're against us, black and white, you know? So, you guys are all talking about pizza on here. Okay. All right, so, yeah. And when it comes to racism, there's a lot of people that only think about it as like white people versus black people, and that ignores speaking of like Asian discrimination, when California was putting up the proposition to ban race as a factor in college admissions, one of the Ward Connolly, who was the author of the of the bill, or the proposition. Prop 209. One of the he was a UC regent. So the University of California, which is the biggest employer in California, by the way. The University of California is the largest employer in California, and they're run by the Board of Regents. Okay, and he proposed Prop 209 to eliminate race as a factor. You know, you can't use race as a factor in hiring, but most famously in university admissions. So when he was proposing this, one of his fellow regents, according to him, you know, that there's no way of confirming this. When he proposed Prop 209, Don Pepys is good. When he proposed Prop 209, one of the fellow regents said, look, if we do this, the number of Asians is going to go up in the UC system. And he's like, so what? And they're like, Asians are boring. They don't have a life. All they do is study. Do we want in our colleges? Do we want in the UCs? People that all they do is study? And I don't know what Ward's response was, but for me it's like, I mean, it's a college. I mean, you know, A, that's like blatantly racist, and B, like, you know, isn't it good to have people that study in college? But the person was just like straight up like, you know, that's all Asians do. All they do is study, and they're going to make the UCs a boring place, and da, 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 da. So, yeah. Yeah, and that was, you know, one of the persons, according to him at least, running the UC system, you know. And today we have the Harvard lawsuit, right? So, basically, I don't have any of you guys heard of this? The Harvard lawsuit, Asian students versus Harvard. Yo, professor, that's kind of racist. Yeah, I would say so. By the way, that wasn't my view. That was, you know, that's not me who says that. Like, you know, that I was paraphrasing what Ward Connolly said, at least, you know, according to him, one of his fellow UC regents said during the Prop 209 debate. I got you. Yeah, please. That is not your professor saying that. That was me paraphrasing a UC regent. Not my view at all. Trust me. Not my view at all. Yeah, I am married to a Chinese American. You know, like I know better. Okay, so the Asian students suing Harvard, it's because Harvard has introduced racial quotas. So Harvard caps the number of Asian students that could be at Harvard, and you know, it's a soft cap. It's not like an official policy as to how many Asian students can go to Harvard. But if you look at it, if you are Asian and you apply to Harvard, it's like your SAT score is, I don't know, like 200 points lower than what a non-Asian would be. So you were given a penalty for admissions if you're Asian. You're being discriminated against. You're being discriminated against, like straight up you are discriminated against based on your skin color. Or country of origin, depending on how you want to look at it. So, so they sued under, the fact that, racism is considered immoral in America, and the Asians lost because they do not unduly discriminate. A little bit of discrimination is okay, and so so the is it? So here's the position. So it's going to be heard in next year. So in next year, the Supreme Court is going to hear the case, and that'll be interesting to see the result of that. So no more, please. So denies engaging in discrimination. Yeah. So plaintiffs have compared the treatment of Asians to the Jewish quota. Remember how we talked about that last time? Yale, the president of Yale said admit no more than 6 Jews per year, right? And so nowadays, it's a soft quota, So if an Asian American applicant with certain characteristics would result in a 25% statistical likelihood of admission, same applicant if white would have a 36% chance of getting in. A Hispanic and black applicant would have a 77% and a 95% chance of admission, respectively. So, that's discrimination, right? And it's racism, both according to the right-wing and the left-wing definition of racism, right? The right-wing people say, look, you're being discriminated against based on your skin color. If you were to magically wave a wand and change your skin color, then if they would admit you and they would not admit you if you're Asian, then that's racism. And according to the left, where all racism is systemic, then, well, maybe it's not that. I don't know. It depends on your perspective, because, the left wants to have equal proportions. Whatever the percentage of the population is, that's the percentage they think should get admitted. And so the reason why Harvard does this is under the left-wing definition of racism, where, you're supposed to admit people according to the population and sort of ignoring the individual characteristics of people. So, yeah. Yeah. So that's an issue going on today, and so we'll find out next. We'll find out next year. What the Supreme Court says about it. Yeah. So yeah, and I sat in on. I signed up for a racism education program at Duke this last semester over the spring, and they were for it. They were for the discrimination against Asian people, which was interesting to me, because we're sitting there on, there's a bunch of computer science professors all studying racism in computer science, which is where I got some of the material for this lecture from. And the people who are presenting it are like, yeah, we need to discriminate against Asian people so we get more black people in. And I was like, bro, like, really? Because, yeah, like straight up, like Ibram X. Kendi, the most famous anti-racist guy, he's like, we need discrimination today to discriminate we need discrimination today to make up for discrimination in the past. And so he straight up said we need to discriminate, and I use the racism to destroy the racism. Yeah, but that's literally the logic. And because if you look at racism as terms of like the outcomes coming out of the admissions process, then you need to put your finger on the scale and discriminate against Asian people. So Um, just drop that in the meeting. Yeah. So, what did you miss? Yeah. Yeah, I was, and I'm just like, that's a really interesting take on it, and I understand where they're coming from, right? Like, their notion is, we have an educational system in America that has unequal outcomes, right? And so, if inner city schools, which have a higher percentage of black people than, rural and suburban schools, if they're not producing good quality education, then we need to just put the finger on the scale and just be like, we need to admit more of those people so it's fair. They're like, we need to discriminate against Asians in the interest of fairness, and it's an interesting take, but it was kind of shocking to me. I was like, that's not what I would have expected from, sitting in on a semester of anti-racism, speakers and stuff like that. So, yeah. If your mom was applied, didn't realize. You cannot beat past fire with fire now. Yeah. So, yeah, I was. Yeah, there you go. And what I talked about last time was, the problem with like inner city schools and stuff like that. It isn't money. Like, there's usually a pay differential. Like, usually teachers at those schools get paid like a bonus to teach at an inner city school. The trouble is actually the quality of education, and it's not exactly the teacher's fault. It's not exactly the student's fault. It's not exactly the parents' fault either. But if you look at the example of people like Jaime Escalante, I don't know. Have you guys heard of was it Stand By Me or whatever? He was played by Edward James Olmos. Stand and Deliver. Sorry, not Stand By Me. Stand and Deliver. So the movie was a bit of an oversimplification of what actually happened in the schools. But basically, he went to an inner city. I think it was like South Central LA or something like that. No, East Los Angeles. Sorry. And quite a poor school. And he taught calculus there. And the movie is sort of a dramatization. It's not entirely accurate, but when he was there, he started boosting. He had just a different way of teaching, and he got his students interested in it. And his the school, which did not produce large numbers of AP. I don't even know if they had a class prior to him. But instead of gearing classes to poorly performing students, he offered AP calculus, and so he ran into conflict with the school system. And so the left-wing people are absolutely right. It is a systemic problem. These schools and school boards, and there's county offices of education, which I've had my own conflicts with in the past. They have a certain way of doing things, and if you try doing something differently, even if you're making a big positive difference like Jaime Escalante did, like, you run into friction with them. And he was frequently threatened with being fired, because he was coming in too early, leaving too late, failing to get permission, because you have to sign this form, if you want to do a fundraiser, and stuff like that. And then he boosted the number of students passing AP Calculus. Let's see, 18, 30, 83 students, So, like, there's this exponential growth in the number of students who are passing the AP Calculus test. It's, and you can't really blame the teachers because, like, it takes a certain kind of person to, like, flip off your principal who's going to fire you. Like, they kept threatening to fire him, and he was, like, turning the math program around at the school, and they're threatening to fire him, and yeah, so he 90% truth. Yeah, so if you haven't seen Stand and Deliver, like there's a lot of truth to it. a lot of it is dramatized, but yeah, there's Jaime Escalante and Edward James Olmos. I bought him a drink once. It's kind of fun. He was I was just in the crowd, and I look over, and Edward James Olmos is standing there. So I sent my female friend over to offer to buy him a drink, and I bought him a margarita. He had a very specific type of tequila that he liked. It's kind of cool. So, yeah, like it. The left wing is absolutely right. It is a systemic problem, but I've worked in education for a long time. I taught teachers. Like that was my jam. Among other things, like I taught teachers for 12 years, and as you meet some, I was just in a crowd, and there's Jaime Escalante, and so he drank a margarita and nodded his thanks, and I talked to him a little bit. This was right after Battlestar Galactica ended, and we were at a Battlestar Galactica music concert, so it wasn't much of a surprise seeing him there. I just told him, I enjoyed the show, and I liked, his acting. I thought he did a fantastic job, and I just wanted to thank him for it. And he was very gracious, and thanked me, and shook my hand and stuff like that, and ran into Colonel Ty and stuff like that. Yeah. Courtney's job right now is a side gig. Yeah, it used to be my job to teach teachers, and then after a while, it's like I could do that. So it's one of the reasons why I started teaching. It's a little bit of ego. It's like, come on, I could do that. So anyway, so yeah. So let's talk about computer science and racism. It's this whole topic is big and complicated, and we're not really doing it, justice by just having 2 days on it. But there's a lot of stuff in computer science too that we need to talk about. So, computer science people oftentimes think that their code can't be racist, can't discriminate. Especially if you don't put race as a factor into your program, right? So there's a software called Compass, and Compass, there's a good article on this, which I'll link on here. Play Tom Hanks this time. Yeah. For some reason, people say I look like Tom Hanks. I don't see it. Maybe they just think I'm like Forrest Gump or something. Bubba, it's funny. So ProPublica, and I have issues with the analysis they did here, by the way, but ProPublica did an article on this about 5 years ago on how there's a software called Compass that looks at people going through the justice system, and it advises judges on how much jail time somebody should get. Okay? And it turned out to be racist. So how is that possible? Because the people who made it, I don't remember the name of the company, the people who made it said we don't use race as an input, right? It's not like, we have a function and you input their race and their age, and then it spits out, and the crime, and it spits out, okay, 7 years because he's black and 1 year because he's white. It doesn't do that. Race is not one of the inputs into the function. And so they said it can't be racist because we're not looking at race. And the reality is it was racist. So if you took two identical defendants, one white, one black, and fed them into the system, the black person was far more likely to get a longer sentence or denied probation or whatever than the white person. And how is that possible? Right? And this is something that a lot of people just don't even think about, and that's one of the reasons why I talk about it here. And this would be a great example of the left wing having a point about systemic racism, right? Systemic racism, because you have a system in place as part of the legal system, and all these criminals come in, or alleged criminals, whatever, come in, they're convicted, okay, they are a criminal now, they're convicted by a jury, and then the system's like, be lenient to these people, be harsh on these people, and they do so by having the people take a survey, things like this, and they feed that into the system. Well, maybe you can start seeing where the racism can come in, right? If you ask people questions like, Are you suspicious of the law? And things like that. Like we saw last time, like, there is a widespread perception, which I think has a basis in reality, that the police treat black people differently than white people. And so if the system is judging you more of a risk if you don't trust the police or something, I don't remember what the exact question is, but it's serving as an example here, then guess what? So it's basically like this program that like looks at all these inputs and then says be harsh, be lenient. And if based on somebody's background the questions get answered differently, then the software can determine they're black actually and be racist. Okay, so they're not using the faces. Like they don't feed the people's faces into it. They don't type in somebody's skin color. Like none of that goes into it. And so a lot of computer science people say, look, it's just a program. Like it's just a CPU. It's a piece of silicon. It's taking data in, and the data is going out. And we're not even looking at race. How can we be racist? And so what happens is that based on the data that's fed in, it can deduce, essentially that it's black, somebody's black or white or Hispanic or Asian or whatever, and then sentence them differently. So Hispanics are also there's disproportional impact, which is the term. If you have the software, you should look at it from a racial lens, which is the one of the things that the people at Duke were talking about. Like you should before you release this thing that's going to be sending people to jail. Like it's a real, like this isn't like some homework assignment for Fresno State, where you just like type up whatever on a discussion forum. It's actually sending people to jail, right? Before you do so, maybe you should look at if your code has a disproportionate impact on people of different races and ethnicities, right? And that's really my thesis, for this talk is like, yeah, just because something is computer science doesn't mean it can't have a disproportionate impact. Just take a look at it, see, and that was the thing with the facial recognition thing too, the coded bias thing, was that they just didn't think to test it on black people. And before you say, well, it's clearly, racist white people, should understand that like there's a number of Asian companies like Sony and LG and Samsung that have cameras that do blink detection that had trouble working with Asian faces. That was a rather famous bug from 4 or 5 years ago, and all these Asian people were posting shots on Twitter where like it's just their face, and Sony's like, did you blink? And they're like, no, MF, like that's my face, and it's an Asian, so clearly they, it's not like they forgot to test it on Asian people because they're in Japan, and so, sometimes it's not a case of that, sometimes it's just the algorithm, so so mostly you just need to just think about it, be conscientious of it, test your code, on people of different races and ethnicities, and if it doesn't work, and facial recognition, like Jay Alumni found, doesn't work as well with people with darker skin. And so, she worked with IBM and these other companies to improve their performance, which, again, double-edged sword, It's like, do we really want to have accurate facial recognition? Because to a certain extent, it's better if it's bad, right? Like, you can't really have a police state if it doesn't work, you know what I mean? And countries like the UK have rolled out cameras like, all over the place. I remember being in Bath, which is a city in kind of southwestern-ish England, in 1999, and I was shocked by how many cameras they had around there. And I was sitting there like eating an ice cream, and I'm walking around like their town center, and this camera is just following me. I'm a college student, so obviously I'm a threat, and I'm just like, and this camera is just like, and I walk this way and the camera goes like this, and I walk this way and the camera goes like this. I'm like, You son of a bitch, dude. You think I'm gonna, like, vandalize? I'm eating an ice cream. Like, come on. You know, and I'm, like, looking at him, like, hi, you know, like, I'm eating an ice cream. Like, I'm, you know, why are you, it's a creepy feeling to just have, there was somebody in the police station who had a joystick that was just sitting there watching me, you know? And this was 22 years ago, you know, and they've been building out hundreds of thousands more cameras since then, you know? And one of the people there is like, don't wave at them. They don't like that. And I'm like, what? They're not going to arrest, like, you know, I'm reasonably certain they're not going to arrest me. Like, what are they going to do? Like, you know, like, I'm eating an ice cream, you know, like, are they going to arrest me for waving a camera, you know? He's like, just don't do that. They might send out somebody to talk to you and harass you. And I'm like, you gotta be kidding me, dude. Like, you know, as an American, you know, America, we're freedom, you know, like, I was like, yeah, this is ridiculous, you know? So, so my ice cream started melting and I started getting all paranoid, like it was gonna, like, you know, do the thing like in Lilo and Stitch where the ice cream falls off and then like a SWAT team would come out and be like, you know, dropped ice cream on the street. You know, I was like, oh damn, I got. Yeah, it's a weird feeling though. Like I didn't make that story up. That's actually what happened to me. And you start getting paranoid, like when you live in a system like that. You know, just, there's somebody watching you at all times. You know, but except it's not really paranoid when they're actually watching you. You know, and so having, you know, and they've layered facial recognition on this, and yeah, and then they send people out to go hassle you, you know, if your name comes up. And so, to a certain extent, having poor facial recognition is almost better because they'll scrap the program, you know. But as it is right now, black people are disproportionately impacted by facial recognition because it's like, that's a criminal, and then they'll go out and hassle the person, you know, who's just going about their business, and all of a sudden the cops come out, you know, like, show me your ID. What are you doing? I'm going to my violin class. Oh yeah, likely story. It's not, even if they let you go, it's not without cost. You know what I'm saying? Like I've been hassled by cops before too, especially when I was in college. It was a weird feeling. And you know, when I was a kid, I was taught, you know, the cops are your friends, they're there to protect you. Then all of a sudden, you know, this one time in college, cops roll up on me, they draw their guns, hold them on me because I had green pants on. And yeah, like, all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I'm the enemy, you know, like, it's not a good feeling. It's really not it doesn't increase your love for the government by any means, you know. And these people are screaming at me, and one of these guys is, you know, their hands are shaking because the officer patted me down. She started screaming, he's got a knife. You know what kind of knife I had? Let me show you the knife. This is literally the knife that I had on me. Right there. Swiss Army knife, Bill Kearney engraved. Right? This is called the Waiter. That's the kind of Swiss Army knife it is because it has a wine opener, a 2-inch long blade for cutting bread, and a bottle opener. It's there for opening beer bottles, wine bottles, and slicing bread. I got it when I was in Switzerland. And the amount of time it would take me to open up this knife while a dude is holding a shotgun on me and another officer is holding a gun on me, I would have been shot 900 million times. And this cop patted me down, and it was on my keychain, you know, it's not like I had it out or anything. She patted me down and started screaming, he's got a knife, and they're like all twitching and stuff like that. And I'm like, if I die because I'm carrying the Waiter on me, I will be very, very angry in the afterlife, you know. So, shadow clinchitsu. Yeah, they do. Yeah, they do sell. They actually do sell Swiss Army knives in Switzerland. So when I was in Switzerland, I bought a Swiss Army knife because I thought it would be cool and had it engraved with my name on it. And it's not even a knife under California law. The blade's too short. There's actually um, a certain size that a knife has to be, and so my point is like all the stuff they're doing in England with like the cameras and the facial recognition and hassling people, like, is not without cost, and like we said last time, people, when I studied facial recognition in grad school, all of us were just concerned, like, how accurate can we get it? There were all these data sets with all these faces, how accurate could we get it? And nobody thought about accuracy, like looking at the black faces versus white faces. Nobody did that. It was just the overall accuracy. So just because something's an algorithm doesn't mean it can't be racist. Thesis statement for today. Facebook's ad system allowed people to choose the race they were advertising to. So you can say, I want you to try and sell, I don't know, golf carts or some nonsense to white people, and black people, we're not going to try and sell them golf. Like, you could just straight up be racist in your advertising, And this was an option that I would have been like, y'all are crazy. I had to be very nice and polite, The situation was I had just gotten back from a backpacking trip, and I parked at one of the parking lots at UCSD, next to a canyon, and I checked out. It was like around 11 o'clock at night, and there was a little stairway that went down into the canyon there, and so I went down in there to look at the nature, because I'm like a hippie or something like that, and right there. And so there's a little trail you can see right there that goes down into the canyon. So I parked like over here. I walked down there into the canyon, and apparently that's suspicious behavior. And one of the bike cops walking by said that he saw somebody in green pants peering into car windows. And so when I come out, the cops come screaming up, and they pour out and they hold the guns on me and stuff like that. And I have to be nice to them. I have to tell them, I just got back from my backpacking trip. And the cop with the shotgun's like, oh yeah, I go backpacking in the desert all the time. Tell me what flowers are blooming right now. And I was like, well, the Ocotillo is in season. Really beautiful. In terms of birds, we saw a lot of Fannie Mae, and he's like, oh yeah. Puts his gun down. All right. This guy's legit. Like literally, I could not make this story up. I was held at shotgun point and ordered to report which flowers were blooming in the Anza Borrego Desert. So, yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. So federal law doesn't allow you to discriminate based on race and ethnicity in housing. You also can't discriminate based on family status, like if you have kids, things like that. And so a lot of apartment complexes will engage in discrimination. Like if there's a family with kids, they'll be like, oh, sorry, we're full right now. And then if a single person comes in, like, oh yeah, let's get you a place right now. And so the federal government does about 100 or 200 lawsuits a year against, apartment complex owners and things like that engage in racial and family discrimination, things like that. The Fair Housing Act prohibits housing discrimination. And Facebook just straight up allows you to do it. Like, click, okay, I want to target 20-year-olds that have no kids, that are white, we're going to advertise our apartment complex just to them. And these scenarios are like out of a Cyanide and Happiness skit. I have the game they made. I forget what the name of it is. It was given to me by one of my friends for one of my birthdays. So, algorithms are also used to approve mortgages, student loans, your resumes, hiring and firing, advertising. All of these can have bias in them, even if you don't program it in. Do you guys get my thesis statement for today? Like, even if you don't program in discrimination, you still got to check to see if your code discriminates. And this topic in general is called algorithmic bias, where even though you didn't program in racist, it still winds up being racist because of secondary characteristics. Like if you use zip code, for example, then if you discriminate based on zip code, then you can end up with racial discrimination. Does that make sense? Because there are some areas where there are more Hispanics and areas where there are more whites and Asians, and you know what I mean. And so, for example, a friend of mine works for a company called Fannie Mae, and do you guys know Fannie Mae? I think I talked about it before once. They're the largest mortgage repurchaser in America. So if you get a mortgage on your house, typically you go through like Wells Fargo or something, and you get a loan from Wells Fargo. What happens about a month after you get your loan? A company buys the mortgage off Wells Fargo. The reason why they do that is because if Wells Fargo hands you $500,000 for a house or whatever, or it's more expensive probably nowadays, with the prices through the roof. But if Wells Fargo hands you $500,000, you pay it back over 30 years. Wells Fargo does not have any more money. It doesn't have that $500,000 to loan to somebody else. And so in order to get more people into houses, remember how we talked about that before? Nobody could justify it, but that was considered an important priority to get more people into houses. There is a company called Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac that purchased the mortgage off the bank. And so they purchased the mortgage from the bank, and then now the bank has $500,000 in cash. And then they can loan to other people. And so it encourages more people to get into houses because banks have more cash on hand to make loans. And so Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have trillions of dollars of assets. And they own basically all of the mortgages in America. And a friend of mine works for Fannie Mae. And one of the things they look at is when they're approving, because they have a software product that purchases the mortgages off people. One of the things they look at is if their software is buying more mortgages from white people than black people or vice versa. And if it is, it's not approved. And they've had the system in place for a while, So the people that are always saying the mortgage system is systematically racist. It was back in the day, for sure, 100%. It was racist. But for the past, 20, 30 years, something like that, it very explicitly is not. The only kind of racism you can have is if the bank doesn't have its mortgage repurchased by Fannie Mae, which I guess could happen, but Fannie Mae itself, it's they look at this. They look at their computer science product, and if it results in a disproportionate impact, then they don't allow it. Sorry, we can't make that change. And it's got to be roughly in the right, proportional, impact. So wasn't that everything back then? Yeah, it's that's why I was being somewhat sarcastic about it. It's if you ever study the story of Hershey, right? There's a guy named Hershey who Hershey's chocolate was named after. There's a town called Hershey, Pennsylvania. When the Great Depression hit, Hershey said, "I am not going to allow a single one of my employees to get fired or lose their job as a result of the Great Depression. I will personally take a pay cut to keep all of you employed." Huge hero. What a nice guy. Also, raging racist, right? It's just, you're like, nah. What a hero. Yeah. 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 It's nice. And that's just I'm just utterly not surprised by any of that when you're talking about people from the 30s and things like that. So, so there are companies, and so the point is that, it's not all bad. There are companies that, and it's required by law, right, to do this, right? You can't engage in discrimination based on race and ethnicity, so they don't, And the Fair Housing Act's been around since the 1960s. To what extent, everything was compliant with it, it's probably gone better over time, but, the reality is it has gone better over time, this, some companies do, in fact, look at this. So, good people with the bad size, yeah. All right. And so, there are people who study this issue. They'll send out resumes to companies. The only difference is ethnicity or race, and then they see what percentage responses they get. And but you have to be careful with it, because sometimes the difference is the name. And so there's a really interesting psychological phenomenon. They think, cognitive bias, they think that the companies are discriminating based on race, but they're actually discriminating in a lot of these cases based on socioeconomic status instead, which is correlated with race. And so, remember how we talked about correlation is not causation last week or 2 weeks ago? They will send out names that are correlated with poor people and correlated with black people, and say, oh, they're being discriminated against. They're correlated. It's the racism, where in fact it's classism. So completely different, except not, because there's a correlation in it. And so you have to be very careful when you do these studies, or when you hear about a study saying, they send out resumes, and you're like, all right, how did you design the study? You have, and this is something that comes all the way back to the first week of this class. Whenever somebody makes a claim, you have to look at it. You can't just like read the headline and move on. And even if there's a study, a lot of times you have to read the study. Like, how did you, did you put a picture of the person and that's the only difference? Everything else is the same? No, usually what it is they change the name. And companies do discriminate based on if you're poor or not. It's not good. But you have to be careful. Is it racism or is it classism that's at work? And a lot of these studies just don't consider that factor. And so if you run the same study with like poor white person names, like the stereotypical redneck names or whatever, then you'll see they also get discriminated against, right? So you have to be very careful when even you're reading studies about this thing, because the people who do the study don't think it through all the way either. And it's recurring theme in this class is that you have to really do your work. You have to be very, very careful how you make a claim and how you present evidence for it, and if the evidence supports the claim. Because their claim was they were discriminating based on race. The reality, maybe, because the counter studies on this could be wrong also. I don't know. But the reality appears to be that a lot of the discrimination is based on class instead of race, or maybe in addition to race. Who knows? So you have to be very careful whenever there's a claim and evidence. You have to look at it. You can't just read the headline. You can't just skim the abstract. Like what methodology do they use? And it takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of mental sweat. And even still, like when there's conflicting studies, like it, you have 7 studies that say one thing and 2 studies that say another thing, and you have to dig into it, and then people do a meta-analysis of it, and it's hard. Life's complicated. But you have to do that work, otherwise you're just gonna, like, whoever comes up with a cool headline, you're gonna just end up believing them. And that's not good. If you're a critical thinker, you have to like try to get at reality as much as you can. Okay. Clickbait. Yeah. So hope that was informative to you all today. Main takeaway point, software is used in a lot of areas of our society today. Tampa Bay area, software tells the police who to hassle. So there's a software product the sheriff's department uses, comes up with the top 10 people likely to commit a crime this month. These people might not have ever committed a crime, but the police will come by, knock on their door. Hey, what you up to? What you doing here? Oh, you haven't cut your lawn in a while. Ticket. And they'll sit there and harass people and try and get them to leave based on software. Software's like, yo, Ziphead is the biggest threat we have in our neighborhood. The cops will come by. Hey, what you doing? What game are you playing over there? Fortnite? Only criminals play Fortnite. And then they say, well, we're not being, it's just the program. The program is fair and unbiased. So, we're just doing what the program told us to do. We're harassing these people because this software, which must be perfect, told us to. Right? And it's like, bro, that is not cool. It is absolutely not cool to just go and screw with people. Because, encounters with police can always go badly. Somebody comes to the door with a gun on, the police are like, he's got a gun. You know, this happened in Phoenix last year. The guy comes to the door late at night. The cops knock on his door. Cops stand off to the side, so the guy looks out through his peephole, doesn't see anyone. He comes out. He's like, "Who's there?" And the cops are like, "He's got a gun! Down, down, down!" And the guy's like, "What, what, what?" And they're like, "He's drawing his gun!" Bam, 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 bam. And they murder the dude. Noise complaint. You know? Every time there's an encounter with police, there's a possibility it goes wrong. You know? And then you have software products like this that are just sending out police to harass people, you know, and they're saying, well, it's fair, it's impartial because it's software. Yeah. All right. So Chicago ran predictive policing for years and ended up scrapping it. So yeah, and you don't know why you're getting harassed. All you know is that every month the cops come by. Hey, what you doing in there? Hey, your car is parked more than 18 inches away from the curb. Here's a ticket. You know, so yeah, and their goal is to drive these people out of their neighborhood. And then if they do leave, there's a new top 10 list the next month. And so, you know, teenagers will be walking to school, and the cops will come by and, hey, what you doing? Let me search your backpack. You know, it's not, you know. But, hey, we're just being impartial. It's software. All right, so that's it for today. I know it's not a happy topic to talk about, but it's really important. If you go into technology, if you go into really the world in any way, just think about these things. Like anytime you do anything that has real world impact, just think about them. That's all I ask. Just think about it. You're making a facial recognition software. Just think about the consequences. Think about if it has disproportionate impact. Okay. So that's it. And on that downer note, we'll do a Halloween party, I guess, on Friday instead. So come here ready to play Jackbox or something. We'll just mess around on Friday. Okay. All right. I'll see you guys then. Peace out.